Greetings to everyone on my channel. So, to better understand the Apollo program, to grasp its reality and feasibility, or rather its unreality and infeasibility, we have to dig deeper. To do this, we will analyze the projects preceding Apollo, namely Gemini, Mercury, and the program for launching the first artificial satellites of Earth. We will start with the latter today. Everything is understood in comparison, so to evaluate American achievements, we will compare them with Soviet achievements from the same period. In 1957, the USSR introduced the R-7 or 8K-71 missile, designed by Sergei Korolev. It was later called the Magnificent Seven. It turned out to be not very suitable for military purposes because it was large, conspicuous, couldn't be used in a silo, and took too long to prepare for launch. However, it was quite suitable for space launches. Under the names Vostok, Voskhod, Soyuz, and Soyuz 2, it still launches Soyuz spacecraft, Progress cargo ships, and other satellites into space. So, the rocket has been in service for 65 years. This demonstrates that successful engineering solutions are used for as long as possible. What was this rocket like? Here it is. Height, 38 meters, launch mass, about 280 tons, propellant, kerosene and liquid oxygen. The total thrust of the four RD-107 engines on the first stage and the RD-108 engine on the second stage, which ignited together with the first, was 383 tons. It was this rocket that on October 4, 1957, launched the first artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik 1, into orbit with a mass of 84 kilograms. The antennas alone weighed 6 kilograms. Inside was a transmitter with batteries, which sent the famous beep 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 signal. Less than a month later, on November 3 of the same year, Sputnik 2 was launched into orbit, weighing 508 kilograms and carrying the dog Laika on board. Since this satellite launch was prepared in great haste under the pressure of Khrushchev, who was determined to send a living creature into space at any cost, Laika's return to Earth was not planned. She was provided with enough food, water, and oxygen for about a week, but she died much earlier, approximately 5 hours later, due to severe overheating. Initially, this was hard to believe, so 2 more control experiments were conducted on Earth, resulting in the death of 2 more dogs. Upon learning this, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals suggested sending Khrushchev himself on the next flight. The proposal went unanswered, and on May 15, 1958, Sputnik 3 was launched, weighing 1,338 kilograms. It carried 12 different instruments and solar batteries. 2 years later, on May 15, 1960, Sputnik 4 was launched, weighing almost 4.5 tons. It had a human-sized dummy named Ivan Ivanovich on board, but the satellite failed to re-enter the atmosphere correctly and finally re-entered on September 6, 1962, breaking up in the dense atmosphere, with its fragments falling on U.S. territory. The largest pieces fell in the city of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and the Americans later placed a historical marker at the location where the largest 9-kilogram fragment was recovered. By the way, it was the Americans who named it Sputnik 4, considering it the 4th Soviet satellite. Of course, several other satellites, including the first lunar probes, were launched between Sputnik 3 and Sputnik 4 over those 2 years. What were the Americans doing at that time? The first American satellite weighed 1,380 grams, was called Vanguard 1A, and was launched on December 5, 1957. The mission lasted 2 seconds. The rocket rose to a height of 4 feet, exploded, and the satellite was thrown clear into the bushes by the explosion. It is now on display at the U.S. Space Museum with its bent antennas. After this, the Americans called on Old Scratch, Wernher von Braun. This was a typical American story.
When von Braun was desperately needed, they forgot about his Nazi past. While he was designing military missiles for the Americans, he was not allowed to launch the first satellite.
But when they failed on their own, they had to call on von Braun.
He proposed his modified V-2 rocket to them. It was now called Redstone or Juno 1.
This was a three-stage rocket, 21 meters tall, with a launch mass of about 30 tons and engine thrust of 35 tons. It was this rocket that on February 1, 1958, launched the first American artificial Earth satellite, Explorer 1, into orbit, weighing exactly 1/10 of the Soviet satellite, at 8.3 kilograms. Here, the data on the mass starts to differ.
Some sources give this exact figure, while others report 14 kilograms.
The confusion arises because there wasn't a separate satellite as such. It was essentially the fourth stage of the rocket attached on top of the first three. Therefore, if you count the mass of the satellite with this fourth stage and an additional Sargent solid fuel missile, it comes out to about 14 kilograms.
The equipment on the satellite weighed 4.5 kilograms. It was lighter than the Soviet equipment, so there was more of it. It included a transmitter and a Geiger counter.
Thanks to this, the Earth's radiation belts were discovered, named after their discoverer, American scientist Van Allen, who received a Nobel Prize for this. Thus, the Americans received one, or by some accounts even two, Nobel Prizes with their first satellite.
Well done, indeed.
So, the Americans launched their first satellite. How much did the second American satellite weigh?
It weighed a whopping 1,474 grams and was launched on March 17, 1958.
Essentially, it was the same Vanguard 1, now without the A index, because its launch was successful. Thanks to its small mass, it was launched into a very high orbit, around 700 kilometers, and it still dangles around up there, being the oldest piece of space debris.
According to some experts, it may hang out there for several more hundred, or even thousands of years.
Explorer 2 failed to launch as its fourth stage engine did not ignite. Explorers 3 and 4 had approximately the same mass, 14 and 16 kilograms respectively.
Finally, Explorer 6 reached a mass of as much as 64 kilograms. On December 18, 1958, another rocket, Atlas, launched the SCORE communications satellite, weighing as much as 3,900 kilograms, into orbit. It might seem that the Americans caught up or almost caught up with the Soviet Union, but hold your applause, let's delve into the details. The Atlas rocket stood 25 meters tall, with a launch mass of 118 tons and a combined thrust of about 162 tons from its three liquid-fueled engines at liftoff. The rocket used the stage-and-a-half design.
What does that mean? Essentially, the first stage consisted of two engines that were jettisoned after burnout. The monocoque with the third sustainer engine was launched into orbit, effectively serving as the artificial Earth satellite itself. The declared payload capacity was 1,300 kilograms, but in this case, the payload was only 45 kilograms. Engineers worked so hard to reduce the rocket's mass that the tank walls were only 0.25 to 1 millimeter thick, about as thin as a beer can. To prevent the empty rocket from collapsing under its own weight on the launch pad, its tanks were pressurized with nitrogen. Instead of support ribs, they used internal pressure.
Later, the nitrogen was replaced with the actual propellant, liquid oxygen, and kerosene. That's the kind of rocket it was.
By the end of 1958, the Americans had conducted 18 launches, of which only 5 were successful. By 1962, they had launched a total of 14 explorers, slightly surpassing the Soviet Union in the number of satellites launched. So, what do we have in the end? By 1960, the Soviet Union had developed a powerful, fairly reliable R-7 launch vehicle, capable of placing spacecraft weighing around 5 tons into orbit. A prototype of the future Vostok spacecraft was already being launched into space. By the time of Yuri Gagarin's flight, 48 dogs had been sent into space, some of them twice.
What did the Americans have?
They had 2 relatively unreliable, low-power launch vehicles capable of placing a payload into orbit that was roughly 1/100th the mass of the Soviet payloads.
And with such resources, these 2 countries entered the next stage of the space race, preparing for human spaceflight. More about that in the next episode.
That's all for today.
Goodbye everyone.